Well, it's hard to believe, isn't it, that it's already April? Where has time gone? I mean, it was just about a month ago that we were preparing for our Lenten journey with Ash Wednesday. If you've ever been to an Ash Wednesday service, you know that Ash Wednesday marks the beginning of Lent, and it's a time in which we have, it kind of sets the stage for things. But one of the things that's always consistent about Ash Wednesday is the ritual of the imposition of the ashes, right? You get that little sign of the cross on your forehead from the ashes made from the palm branches from Palm Sunday the year before. And the pastor, usually I start with saying, something along the lines, from dust you came, to the dust you shall return. I don't know about you, but I always think those words are, they're a little morbid sometimes. Why would you say, hey, you're going to die, right? Why would you remind people of that? I mean, that's probably the least popular thing that you could probably say to somebody. So I quickly usually shift to, well, we understand life is short, a precious gift that God has given us. And so may you be a light in this world to share the good news of Jesus Christ in all you do and all you say. And there's kind of a time that becomes real personable. Is that right? Okay, good. All right, so I try to, pray with the person and for the person at the same time, celebrating what God is doing in their lives and blessing them to continue to be a powerful witness for Jesus, not just during Lent time, but also throughout their lives. Be a witness for Jesus. Well, I think about that Ash Wednesday and those words that are spoken and the reminder of the service that life is short. That life is a gift. And we should celebrate that and embrace every moment that we have, because we don't always know when it's going to be our time, right? And Lent gives us that opportunity to realize that and maybe reset our priorities in life, to look at what's most important, and to stop wasting our lives on the things that don't bring true joy or force us to struggle and search for answers to questions that we might have. It's a reminder to us on that Ash Wednesday that death is a part of life. Well, I guess I don't have to remind you that we've been through it a little bit these last few years, haven't we? I mean, death has been so present in the minds of people, and fear has seized some people, and almost a mass paranoia for some people. Afraid that they may get COVID. Remember when it first came out? I mean, the news was terrible. You were given a death sentence. If you had COVID, you were going to die. That was all there was to it. And we took every precaution that we could and tried to do our best to manage through the situation. But that reality of, wow, it could happen to me, became forefront in our mind. Well, we had that, and no sooner do we get out of the COVID situation, but now we face unrest in our world, uncertainty in Ukraine that has us thinking, well, what if? What if this accelerates and these two nuclear powers, the United States and Russia, go at it? We'll be back to hiding under our desks and doing drills at school and everything else. It could happen tomorrow. Life is short. And it's filled with those unexpected things, those stumbling blocks that catch us off guard, that gut punch. It's filled with grief and loss. Maybe that just unites us and brings us together. After all, it is the shared experience of life that we all have, that at any time, Any moment, we may get that news, that something may happen, that something may go sideways in our lives that wakes us up and says, oh my gosh, what am I doing with my life? Or maybe it paralyzes us with fear. I don't know which it is, but we all face it. We all have that choice of what we're going to do when we get that news. What we do when we realize how short and how precious a gift life really is. You know, Julian of Norwich, one of the mothers of the church, was facing a situation during the Bubonic Plague where we've gone through with COVID, similar to that. And she was worried, and people were dying all around, and friends and loved ones were leaving the earth to be with Jesus. And she was upset about it. She wondered what to do. And one night she heard a response to her prayers. God spoke to her. Said, all shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. Even in the face of her mortality and the circumstances that she was living in, God's reminder was there. Everything shall be well. In the scripture today, it's interesting to see what's really happening. It seems like it's just a routine event, right? Life is going along and there's a sort of a celebration that's happening because Lazarus has been raised from the dead. But I think that if we take a deeper look into this passage today, we'll discover where God's at work, our response to the shortness and the gift of life, the vulnerability that we all experience, and maybe come away with a different mindset about how to live life. Well, just before this, Lazarus has been raised by the dead. We remember the story, right? And so Lazarus dies. Mary and Martha, his sisters, call for Jesus to come because he's ill, and he dies, and they anoint his body. They put him in the tomb, and they're on their way back, and they're just full of grief and sadness and mourning, and they encounter Jesus on the road coming to see them. And what do they say? Hey, Jesus, where were you? Our brother is dead. And Jesus says to them back, well, don't you believe in the resurrection? And they go to the tomb, and Jesus calls Lazarus forth. There's a restoration, a renewal, a resurrection of Lazarus. Sort of like a mini Easter in a lot of ways, isn't it, when you think about it? It's only a week before Jesus will experience his Holy Week, or that last week of his life. And it's almost as if Lazarus gives us a preview of what's about to happen for Jesus. It's also a reminder, like Julian of Norwich's answer, all manner of things shall be well. Their grief is turned to joy, and now in today's passage, we see that the celebration has begun. Lazarus is back with us. Their grief is now joy, and all is well. Well, maybe. Because at the end of the story, Jesus tells those gathered around at the table, he's not always going to be with them. Kind of shocking news when you think about that. In the midst of a celebration, to hear some bad news. Kind of like a downer in some ways. But it's not meant to be. It's meant to be good news. You know, there's a professor, her name is Kate Bolin, and she goes, she's probably still mourning today because Duke lost last night. But anyway, sorry, Darren. But she was a professor, and she was a mother, a new mother. She had a beautiful relationship with her husband, and she was writing this book that she had been working on for years. And one day she was lecturing, and the next day she got the bad news. Doctor's office called and said, "You have cancer and it's terminal." Here she had her whole life ahead of her, excited about all that was happening and blessings in life, and then, bam, she gets hit with the bad news. What a reminder that life is as fragile as soap bubble, she said. But something happened in her life, how she responded to that news. Instead of focusing in on the bad news, she focused in on the gift of life that she had left. She began to live every and each moment to its fullest. Not in frivolous living and just doing her own thing. She didn't chase after her bucket list or any of those things, but she developed a hyper-awareness of things. In the shortness of time that she had left, she cherished the giggles of her newborn son, the warmth that came from his crib, just being able to spend time with her husband, family, and friends. She began to just realize that while we have an infinite life, every moment that we have is a gift. She realized that sometimes life seems fragile, but it's at the same time gorgeous and at the same time ridiculous. I think we've all faced that. Instead of responding with sorrow and grief and self-pity and doing things that weren't going to be helpful, she began to live every moment. Back to that dinner party. At that dinner party, there was a sense of urgency too. You see, in Jesus' announcement, why that announcement was so shocking was in part because of one of the guests at the table. Lazarus had been raised from the dead, right? Now, if somebody's raised from the dead, that's going to get your attention, isn't it? It certainly drew the attention of those against Jesus. In fact, they developed a plot to kill both Lazarus, to quiet that story down once and for all, and to kill Jesus. There was the reality of the fragileness of life. Now Jesus was going to face his own death. Now, there's two responses here. Interestingly enough, we can look at what Mary did in response to this situation. And we can look at what Judas did in this situation. Now, Mary has bought this expensive perfume, a nard, that is used in the anointing of the dead. And she realizes, since there's a plot against Jesus, his time is short. And so she does an extravagant thing. She gives Jesus an extravagant gift of love. She lives the moment to its fullest, realizing what's about to happen. But Judas, on the other hand, is only concerned about one thing. He's only concerned about that money. He's only concerned with how he can get his hands on it. He's only concerned about his own needs. He's only concerned about the present moment, but in a different way. Self-serving way. So you've got Judas, who's self-serving, and Mary, who's sacrificing. Love. Mary knows that life is as fragile as a soap bubble. She's experienced the grief and the pain and the sorrow of losing her brother. But now, because of Jesus raising him from the dead, she realizes something else about life. That it's love that gives life meaning. And in her act of love, she shows Jesus something very special. Or we can be like Judas, wanting to succeed, trying to climb the ladder, looking out for our own self-interest, wasting our lives, chasing after success and our own needs. We can be like Mary, live a life of significance. The question today for all of us is then, how will we live? Will our priorities be on our own climbing the ladder, success, our own needs, fulfilling our own desires? Or will we realize that we can live a life of significance, a life of meaning, a life with purpose, a different life that reflects what we believe and what we say we believe when we say that God is love, that Jesus came to show us love, to teach us how to love. We can be a Mary or we can be a Judas. We can pour out everything that we have in an extravagant act of living and love. We can be like Judas, self-serving, self-centered, only concerned about him. Well, I'd suggest that we try to live a little bit more like Mary, maybe like Kate. See, life has these twists and turns. We all know that. I mean, I just look back at my week. There have been 2 young boys that have passed away this week. One, who was a part of the Wheeler Christmas Blessing, was having surgery for a cleft palate. I heard that and I thought, that shouldn't have. Cleft palate? And it didn't seem to make sense. I heard about some other losses this week of people who were mourning and grieving. You might even be holding on to some grief and loss of a past relationship. But at the same time, in the midst of 1 week's time, yesterday, Tammy's nephew welcomed their daughter into the world. Amazing. We have in this life this fragility of days that we have, and we lose people we love, and then at the same time or within moments or days later, new life springs up. What are we going to choose to focus on? What are we going to choose to do with our lives? Are we going to live fully present in each moment, grieving and comforting those who have lost, and at the same time being able to celebrate and love those who are celebrating new beginnings? I think this passage today reminds us that we have a choice. Where we put our priorities. The question we all need to answer is, how will we live?